Howdy, everybody. Today we're going to do kind of a two-part lecture, so the Roaring Twenties. So we're talking about the rapid changes, mainly social changes that are going on, and then followed up by the kind of fearful reaction to that. So first off, we have to understand there's kind of a dual nature of the 1920s. You have progress, modernization, new inventions and technologies all happening in the cities, but the rural places in the United States are feeling left behind. The war in Europe has just ended, so World War I, the Great War, and Wilson's coming home. The only part of his 14 points that they've accepted into the Treaty of Versailles is the League of Nations. Now, what's interesting about the League of Nations is it was Wilson, the American president's idea. The U.S. Congress votes to stay out of the League of Nations. They think that it's going to influence the United States, control the United States. So even though we stepped out of the United States to go help in Europe, we still have that voice of George Washington in our ear saying, no foreign entanglements, do not attach ourselves to foreign powers. Now, the president in 1921, Warren G. Harding, is going to give a pretty revolutionary speech. Now, the speech he's going to give, and he's talking to a half white, half black audience in Birmingham, Alabama. That's one of the most racist and segregated cities in the South. He says two things. First and foremost, he says black and white people are never going to be equal. It's not a thing that we are going to be able to face or deal with. The racial difference could not be bridged. Like, we can't bridge this gap between us. And then he says, however, so all the white people in the audience are like, yes, that makes sense. There's no way to communicate between blacks and whites. So on and so forth. So everyone's kind of murmuring, okay, fine. Then the second part of his speech, he says, however, we should still push for equal rights. Even though black and white people can never live together in true harmony, politically and under the Constitution, blacks and whites should have equal rights. So this, whatever murmurs were going on in the white portion of the audience, stunned, shocked silence. And then the black portion of the audience is like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That sounds right. So you have a very bold speech in a very racist and segregated place during a very strange piece of time. So just keep that in mind for what's coming a little bit later. So also passed in 1924 is something called the Bonus Act, which said all World War I veterans would receive a bonus in X year. So it's going to be like in 1940 or something along those lines. Then you have the biggest scandal of the era, the Teapot Dome oil reserve scandal. Now, we knew there was oil under this one area. We knew there was a big oil reserve. It had been earmarked for strategic military oil reserves. That means you can't drill oil there because it's going to stay in the ground until we go to war and the military needs that oil. Then we can tap into it, drill it, and use that oil for military purposes. In the White House, some of the advisors got wind of this oil reserve, started giving special deals to oil companies to drill in the strategic oil reserve. This gets out, blows up, and it makes the presidency and his administration look very, very dubious at the very least. And this is going to be the biggest scandal in American history until Watergate with Nixon. Now, there's a whole slew of cultural and demographic changes in the 1920s all across the United States. Things are changing at a rapid pace. You can see from these two pictures, style has changed from what it was just a few years before. We'll get more onto style in just a second. First, and the demographic change. You have something called the Great Migration. So this is African Americans basically fleeing the South in large numbers. So on the eve of World War I, about 90% of all African Americans lived in the South. As a result of World War I, many of the white men were going overseas to fight. African American men saw the opportunity to take their families north to many of these factory jobs to get better lives, to get out of Jim Crow South, all these kinds of things. You have this mass migration out of these regions. So people are moving for a better life, for a life with arguably less prejudice and racism. While there still is racism and prejudice in the North, it's nowhere near as institutionalized as it is in the American South. So families are moving and migrating in a large number. Now, when they get to cities like New York, you're going to have cultural movements that strike as well. This is going to be the big one in New York is going to be is Black Harlem, or the Harlem Renaissance. And you get a lot of new cultural icons. And this is when African American kind of pop culture is going to become the dominant culture in much of the United States. So you have singers like Billie Holiday, Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, all coming to the forefront and becoming prominent performers, kind of crossing the boundary between black and white audiences. So you have black performers and white audiences. So you have this weird duality in American society. Now, black culture is going to be able to go mainstream, not because of a black artist, but because of a white artist, taking rock and roll, so taking the various jazz, blues kind of things that are growing in popularity, morphing them into a more white accepted package with a white guy singing and dancing, and you get, the birth of rock and roll in America. So Elvis Presley is just building off what other people have done, but in a more kind of socially acceptable package for the it started in the 1920s. By the time we get to the 30s, 40s, 50s, Elvis is on the scene making a name for himself. Now, life in these cities is very different from what it was before. So there's a lot of Southerners in these new cities, black and white alike, and new things are there to be experienced. You have movies. So you went to the movies for a variety of reasons. One, to watch the movie, obviously, but before the movies, there weren't really previews to speak of, but they had newsreels because you didn't have TV at home yet. So you'd watch these newsreels and see the world. And most importantly, a lot of these movie theaters were able to have air conditioning. So in places like Texas, this is a huge boon during the summer. So people will just go watch movies multiple times just to have, an hour or two in the cool air. Radio, however, is the most profound cultural growth icon of the time because you could have one in your home. As more people got electricity, the radio brought entertainment into the house. Music, radio shows, all kinds of things. The first radio station was KDKA in Pittsburgh that went on the air in 1920. By 1923, there were 566 stations and 400,000 households with radios in them. The number of homes with radios went from about 2 to 400,000 in 1923 to 5 million by the end of the decade in 1929. And a whole variety of shows, such as Superman, are on the radio. You have a radio play that terrifies the nation, The War of the Worlds, by H.G. Wells. So you have these big things that are changing. When the War of the Worlds first went on the radio, for the first few minutes, for the first hour or so, people thought there was an invasion because they kind of recorded it as though it was a news broadcast. You have new inventions like the hair dryers. How would you like to travel with a hair dryer like that? You have the electric light. So we talked about Edison and the electric light and his light company. You have vacuum cleaners. These are force multipliers. They allow you to do the same work in less time. Therefore, you have more free time to do things like go to the movies and listen to the radio. Washing machines are coming onto the scene. The electric gyrator, all these kinds of things. So new style washing machines. And then, of course, you have automobiles. Now, automobiles have been around for a while, but they've been very expensive. Henry Ford is going to change that with his Model T. His mass production, his assembly line, all these new ideas are coming together to produce a very cheap and affordable, but a reliable automobile. So you have the first cars coming out in large numbers. And as people get these cars as families start buying more and more cars. The children in these families, teenagers are able to, prior to having access to a car, you were trapped, if you wanted to go on a date, walking around the neighborhood with your date. Everyone was hot, so they were sitting outside, so everyone could see you and your date walk around. Now you have a car, you can take that car, you can go somewhere where parents can't see you and do all kinds of things. So, style-wise, you have women dressing in new ways. So instead of the big dresses or the big hoop skirts or the tight corsets, you now have slips, basically slip style dresses made of silk, much shorter cut hair, tight hats. The more androgynous look is the desired look during this time period, so more waif-like and thin. So this is a very big shift from what it was, just a decade or two earlier. Now, you have all of these changes, and they're starting to scare people. You have alcohol coming onto the scene, and more importantly, you have prohibition. Everyone was drinking during the Great War. During the 1920s that you start having prohibition come onto the scene to try to do away with much of what they perceived as the evils in society. Get rid of alcohol, get rid of evil. However, it had an unintended consequence. Mobsters and the mafia, men like Al Capone, come onto the scene and make a lot of money smuggling alcohol. And the smuggling of alcohol pays for all the other endeavors, prostitution, gambling, all these other types of criminal activities are funded by smuggling of alcohol. And they're going to build massive crime networks. This is where we get the building of organized crime in a proper way in the United States. And it's going to bring death and a high toll to the United States, such as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, where 7 men were murdered by rival gangs. So this is showing kind of the violence of the time period and what's going to kind of spark some of the reaction we're going to talk about. So there's the execution of some of these men. Immigrants are coming in large numbers. Some of these immigrants are coming from countries like Russia or Eastern Europe that have communist leanings. And that's scaring the United States because communism is a big boogeyman for capitalist America. These immigrants are coming, taking jobs, working for lower wages. They're speaking a whole variety of different languages. So it's a very challenging time for many Americans. Now keep in mind, most of these Americans were immigrants just 1 or 2 generations ago. Mexican Americans during this time are pursuing their own act of civil rights. So you have LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens. Now in Texas, you have segregation. Now primarily it's targeted towards blacks and whites, but Mexican Americans, they called Spanish, only anybody who was a Spanish speaker, were also being discriminated against. So LULAC had a choice. And like in the census, you had really 2 options, black or white. So if you filled anything out and they would put your race, you had 2 options, black and white. Now, Mexican Americans and African Americans in Texas often did the same work. They were the same socioeconomic, same area, all that kind of stuff. So you'd think they would ally together to pursue civil rights. But because of the dichotomy in society, black and white, LULAC made the decision. Which one's better to be, black or white? They say, we're going to be white. We're going to check the white box. So they say, stop speaking Spanish. Dress in the way white culture says to dress. The white portion of the United States, of Texas, says to dress. Behave in a way that would make you acceptable and palpable to white society, and kind of do away with the Mexican and Latin American heritage. So they kind of voluntarily whitewash themselves and throw African Americans under the bus in order to not be as discriminated against. And this has some moderate success, but we'll see the kind of LULAC approach fade away as we get more into other Latin American, Chicano, different other movements for Mexican American and Hispanic civil rights. Now, you have all these fears coming together. So you have African American culture coming to prominence. So you have all these young people, young kids, white audiences watching black singers and performers. You have new things like the radios, new technology. You have massive waves of immigration. You have minority groups like the Mexican Americans pursuing civil rights. You have organized crime rising. All this is coming together to terrorize much of middle class white America. So what are they to do? Well, a new organization, or not quite new, but an organization from America's past is going to rise up and promise to restore law and order. That organization is the second Ku Klux Klan. Now, this is a slightly different Klan from what the first one was. So we had the old Klan, which basically said, we hate black people and we don't want them to vote. Okay, cool. This new 1920s Klan ideology has changed. Basically, in order to get support of the Klan, you needed to be white, Protestant, and native born. That means born in the United States, so non-immigrant. So basically, if you weren't all three of these things, you were going to be a target for the Klan. And this is going to get massive popular support. Now, while they're equal opportunity haters, this new Klan also likes to have fun. This is the Klan at a state fair. So I think this one's in Kansas or one of the states kind of in the Midwest. And then, don't worry, there was a Klan Day at the Texas State Fair here in Dallas. So we did not escape this. People went out in full Klan regalia because this was a popular organization. This wasn't just popular in the South, this was popular across the nation. They had people called Kleagles. These are like the Klan ambassadors. And one of the big tools they used in the 1920s to recruit people is the movie Birth of a Nation. This was one of the most popular movies of the 1920s. And it was about their first Klan and how they were saviors of the South and they defended the virtue of Southern women and all this kinds of stuff. It was that rewriting of history like we talked about in the very first lecture. So just like if you watch, like an action movie today, you're like, oh, cool, I'm going to go learn some of the stuff I saw in the movie. When people came out of Birth of a Nation, they're like, oh man, the Klan sounds like a really cool thing. Well, lo and behold, there's a Kleagle standing outside the theater handing out pamphlets saying, join the Klan. And this recruited lots and lots of people into the new Klan. Now, Woodrow Wilson had a little blurb because he aired this video at the White House. And he had a little blurb that said, this is one of the best histories I'd ever seen. And this is coming from the president, which is already a big boon for the movie. But he was also a history professor before he was president. So this is something that's going to lend credibility to this, even though it was a complete farce. There was no truth in this video or in this movie. And it's not just men joining this. You have women. You have them dressing up their children as Klan members. This is not a male-only angry men thing like it was in the post-Civil War era. By the 1920s, you have this new wave of kind of egalitarianism in the Klan. You even have Klan-themed weddings during this time. So this is a weird period for American history. Now, where did the Klan find a new home? So it started in Stone Mountain, Georgia. That's where the new Klan was reborn. That's kind of the big, broad organization. But it's going to find a new home somewhere they find more receptive to their ideas. Unfortunately, that is Texas. So kind of the first big chapter is in Houston, with them moving their headquarters to Dallas very shortly after. So the Grand Imperial Wizard is a guy named Hiram Wesley Evans, and he's a dentist from Dallas. And they are going to move the headquarters to Dallas and kind of launch and control this big multi-million, about 5 million people by 1925 KKK organization from Dallas. So this is a kind of twisted thing. Now it's going to be at the height of this new Klan. that Black Wall Street, so that Tulsa, Oklahoma neighborhood, is going to witness that race riot and have their whole livelihood, lifestyle depleted. And although they rebuild, they never quite get to the level they were before. But what's worse is this Klan, and it wasn't necessarily the Klan that did the race riot, but when you have the Klan getting popular acceptance, people in that area feel more willing to do things like that. So the Klan actually has a march on Washington, D.C., and you have thousands, tens of thousands show up and march, faces uncovered, towards the Capitol, celebrating this Klan ideology. So this is a strange sight to see in our capital, the Klan members walking unmasked on the main thoroughfares. What gets crazier, Earl B. Mayfield from Texas wins as an open supported Klan member as a U.S. Senator. So the Klan moves beyond just being kind of an ideological organization to being a political one, trying to win people in Congress to make Congress begin shifting the United States ideology towards one of the Klan. Now, as quickly as this Klan grew in the 1920s, it fell apart. Partially because it started turning inwards on itself. It started attacking its own members. It took its ideas, claims of law and order too far, and you have corruption in the Klan leadership that gets out. People start saying, oh, you were supposed to protect us, but now you're causing some of the problems and you're doing some of the terrible things that you were supposed to protect us from. And as quickly as it grew, it began to fall apart. But from the 1920s on, there's going to be this lingering remnant of the Klan in many southern states, but also in northern and western states across the United States. So these 1920s are kind of a Jekyll and Hyde situation. On one hand, you have an era of prosperity and wealth for some, particularly those in the cities. For others in rural areas, they feel left behind. They're producing all the food for the cities, but they get none of the amenities. Then you have the fear and strangeness of all these new experiences that you simply don't know what to do with, which leads rise to the second KKK. And it's going to all come to a head at the turn of the 1930s, so 1929 to 1930, when you have that massive stock market crash that begins what we know as the Great Depression. We'll stop there for today, and we'll pick up with the next lecture next time. Y'all have a great day.